Koto. Kia ora. Hello. Kia ora. It's past. We're ready to go live. Okay, so kia ora koutou. Thank you for coming today and for the start of our first Happy New Year and first meeting of the Strategy and Policy Committee. So we'll crack straight in. I think we have a Mihi from Karakia first. Okay, so we're going to have Karakia from Councillor Davies first.
Ka haia te ata, ka hapara te ata, ka koroki te manu, ka wairori te kutu, ko te ata nui, ka horaina, ka taki te umere, he pō, he ao, ka awatea.
Tihei mauri ora. Ka tuau anō nei ki te mihi atu ki a koutou, ko taumai nei I tēnei rā, mō tēnei hui tuatahi o te tau, rua manoa rua te kaumā rima, nei rā te mihi ki a koutou ka tō ki a koe Viki, mō te kaihautu o tēnei waka, tēnā koe, ki a koe Joe, mō te karakia timatanga, tēnā koe, tēnā koutou nā kai kaunihera, nā kaimahi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ki te hāpori he mā takitaki nei, tēnā koutou hoki, ka huri au takawakaro ki ngā tini aitua, ko wehe atu ki te pō e ngā mate o ia marae, o ia takiwa, o ia motu, haere atura. Ki ngā kahurangi o Aotearoa, ko mati I tēnei tau, ko kahurangi Tariana Turia, no Whanganui, no te kahurangi Iritana Tā Whiwhi rangi, no Ngāti Parau, kahununu Ngā Puhi, nei te mihi aroha kia koutou tō whānau, kei Whanganui, kei Parau, kahununu Ngā Puhi hoki, moi mai rā. Ka huri au takawhakaro hoki ki te tangata tōrongopū o Russell Marshall. Russell was a former Labour minister, first Minister of Conservation. He was Minister of Environment and Education, so appropriate we acknowledge Russell too. And lastly, just wanted to acknowledge Lou Robinson, who's the father of Councillor Robinson, passed away also early in the new year. So just thoughts with the families of Russell, but also Genevieve. Our thoughts are with you. Nei te mihi aroha ki a koe, ki tō whānau hoki, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manuanui. So kia ora tātou. Awesome to be here for our first meeting of the year. Thanks, Vicky. And I'm going to hand back to you now, but thanks, Joe, for the karakia. Awesome acknowledgements to our staff and to our councillors here today, and look forward to our first hui of the year. Kia ora, Vicky.
Kia ora. So just to acknowledge that we do have a quorum present, so the meeting is open, and we can move on to the next item, which is apologies, and we have an apology from Councillor Cranwell, who's away on council business today. Conflicts of interest, do we have any? I'm not aware of anything. No. Then we have public forums, deputations, petitions, and we don't have any. Extraordinary and urgent business, I'm not aware of any. No. And notice of motion, we don't have any notice of motion today. So then we'll move to item 7.1, which is minutes from the last meeting of the Strategy and Policy Committee, which was back in ages ago, 2024, November the 6th. So can I have anybody who's got any edits or queries about anything in the minutes from that meeting? No. So can I have a mover for the minutes? Councillor Ward, and a seconder, please. Councillor Robinson. So confirming the minutes of the Strategy and Policy Committee on the 6th of November, confirming those correct. All those who are in favour, please say aye. Those against? No one, so that's carried. Thank you. So then moving on to the reports for decision. So item 8.1, we've got a paper on the next steps for Strategy and Policy Committee Forward Work Programme. So this was a conversation that we had on our agenda back in October. It was the 9th of October. And so this is a paper being brought back to this meeting, and we're having a workshop later in the month. So we have Emma Davies, the Senior Strategy Manager, who will introduce this report. So come to the table. Thank you, Emma. Kia ora. So when you're ready, Emma.
So the purpose of this report, as the Chair outlined, is really to introduce and provide visibility of the upcoming workshop, which we've got scheduled for later this month on the 27th of February, to review the committee's forward work programme. The report also provides an update on the papers and the decisions of the committee to date since it was established in August last year, and when the forward work programme was endorsed. And I think the forward work programme, looking through the report, really just highlights the breadth of strategic issues that this council is considering. So the workshop will be an opportunity to provide input and discussion of the relevance and prioritisation of the forward work programme for the year ahead. And we will continue to work with the Chair and Deputy Chair in developing that, and look forward to then workshopping that later this month.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Oh, Stephanie's different, but I think you might need to use a different microphone. Just
Okay. So do you want to try a different mic now, Emma? And let's just test and see if that works before we go into questions.
Is that better?
Oh, it's better here. Yeah, I can hear that. Sorry, I hadn't picked that up. Right, so questions. Councillor Burns?
Kia ora, thanks, Chair, and thanks very much. It's good to have a look through and see what's coming up and what's being done today. I just have a question on paragraph 10 on page 19, and it refers to the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy and that Boffa Miskell have been engaged to assist. Can you just flesh that out a little bit? I was under the impression that we had the capacity in-house to be able to carry out the revitalisation.
So we do have some budget, and the intention was to get some support for that program of work. So they're supporting the staff in the development of that. We will be coming back at the next month's committee meeting and giving a full update on that. So, that we're working together with Boffa Miskell in their role to support the revitalisation of that strategy.
Okay, second. Yeah.
Kia ora, thanks. Just on that, so I think you pretty much answered it anyway. So there's no implications as far as funding required or whatever, given that we're getting consultants in to support it?
No, that was all budgeted for. So that was within the budget for this year's annual plan.
Okay, so Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the paper. In reading the paper, to me, it almost feels like it's delivery and delivering upon what we've decided. And don't take it the wrong way, but this is a strategy and policy committee, and so where is the bit where we're actually looking forward to some significant challenges of thoughts and conversations? So I welcome the opportunity for the workshop to actually talk about what the future looks like, rather than reading a paper on what we've already agreed to do. And it just doesn't quite sort of, for me, take the focus into the future and sort of that blue sky, greenfield, whatever of challenging strategy and policy. So welcome the opportunity for the workshop. to actually take us forward rather than maybe just thinking about what we've already have in place. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Yeah, the workshop will be very much looking forward and thinking about those strategic issues. We thought it was an opportunity just to capture some of the achievements from the committee to date since it was formed, so that was the reasoning behind the inclusion of that too.
Okay, Councillor Ward, I think you had. Oh, you were just trying to do an extra wave on behalf of Councillor Sunkel. Okay, thanks. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'd actually like to take John's question or comment a bit further, because it seems to me there's quite a range of topics already proposed as a forward work program. And it would seem to me the logical way of doing that would be to involve the portfolio chairs with working groups to actually develop some of the proposals to then bring back to a workshop, so that you actually have perhaps a more strategic approach to what is required, the timing of when you might do that work, and what it looks like.
That's the intention of the approach. So we're getting further updates on each of those sort of programs and areas. Is that?
Yeah, no, it's which comes first, the horse or the cart? And it looks to me like you've got the cart first, and the horse isn't there because you're going to have a discuss it with the strategy committee, rather than actually take the lead from the portfolio leads in terms of what they what a small group of them might consider as strategic and important for the development of those portfolios. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I acknowledge that, and I think we have got some meetings set up with the core service councillor leads to actually, have those discussions.
And I guess what you probably we had a brief discussion in Councillor Only time about actually setting up some working groups to actually help progress some of this work, I think.
We can certainly look at different mechanisms for progressing the work.
Yeah. And as the chair of this committee, I've flagged that it would be good to have a bit of oversight of what the workshop, how it's being structured and what it's going to cover. And for my own part as well, I picked the whole system of approach to river resilience. I just was keen to make sure that is actually looking at the sort of whole catchment, the whole interaction of groundwater and surface water, and this big picture, water resilience, etc. Yeah, there's some big meaty topics in there that will certainly take more than one workshop, and it's how we pick those up and then move them forward. And I think you're right that the leads are really critical in that as well. So hopefully we can all sort of come together around that in the work up to the workshop, and then we'll pick that up from there and move it forward. So unfortunately we've had like the big Christmas break, the gap. So it's always picking things up again in the new year, isn't it? It takes a little moment to get running. Kia ora. Councillor Swiggs next. Oh. Does the one on the end? Do you want to check that one to your... I think the camera will still pull around to you, Dion.
1, 2.
Oh no, yours is working. Nook's is good.
Come back to me.
Okay. Councillor Edge.
Is this working?
Yep.
Oh, that's good. Look, I'm really excited about this having a bit of a review, but I really do think that the meeting on the 27th, if it is a broad discussion about people's views, and then going away and kind of working on more strategically and in more detail. But whichever way you go, I think those things will come out anyway. But I think having a general discussion kind of focusing on things is a better way to go. I can only think of the last term, the discussions that led to the strategic direction of council was based on a really good discussion around a table, facilitated, and from that we derived a long-term plan that we have kind of been pursuing even in this term. So good things can come out of some really good discussions, and especially about the future. What does the future hold for us? in respect to changes. One thing that I have looked at in the last week or so was what's going on at the Mayoral Forum. I feel slightly in the dark about what the Mayoral Forum's up to and the number of Mayoral Forums that there are. I was particularly interested in the Economic Forum and what is that all about and how that might shape our economic development strategy. So will that's something, I know you've got to meet, the Mayoral Forum's got a meeting on the 14th. So after that meeting and prior to the meeting on the 27th, will we have some sort of briefing or distribution of documents that come out of the Mayoral Forum so that it can help inform us?
We are very conscious of giving visibility to the topics and the work that the Canterbury Mayoral Forum and regional forums have initiated and are involved in. So we will definitely include that in the information that we provide. There are some of the minutes and things available, but we will very much bring that, give visibility of that, if not prior to the workshop, certainly at the workshop we've got that as a key piece of information to feed in.
Okay. Dion, do you want to try again?
Does this unplug it and plug it back in and it might work? So my question was actually, it's related to what Ian and also to Councillor Sunkel or Councillor Mackenzie has said. Now we've got the connection with our portfolios and the other committee at a governance level, and how the Regional Delivery Committee was doing the groundwork, reporting on the actions that are happening, reporting back on their business as planned, and then when things need fixing or things need looking at from a policy level, that was meant to feed back into the governance space around this table to go, okay, these are the things that we can look at. What's the connection at the moment between the two committees at a staff level to inform that work as well? I just wanted to understand that, because if that's not happening explicitly, can we bring that back to that that workshop whenever 27th of February to tease that out a little bit, because that's where I think a lot of what the councillors have been saying here may actually be able to be captured in that way. But I'd just like your thoughts on that.
So we've got the work programs for both the two committees, and at a staff level, we're very aware of and doing work to make sure that those are sort of integrated and looking at the overlaps and how things, the sort of interdependencies between the strategy work and the delivery work. So at a staff level, within my team, we are considering both of those and a kind of the coordination of that, and then reaching into the across the organisation into the operations groups in terms of what's happening, and then thinking about that. So that is occurring. In terms of, we'll give some further thought to how we bring that. We wanted the focus on the 27th to be on this SMP committee, but that's not without considering the delivery side. We was actually considering we'd probably need a second. That will be the first of the workshops. There'll need to be further work done to then link it back to the delivery.
Sorry, I just want to tease that out slightly here. Madam Chairman, Chairperson. It is intrinsically important, though, I'm just not hearing that they've got a critical view on what's coming in through the papers at the Regional Delivery Committee, and also any of the work programs that the Regional Delivery Committee are that report to that committee, or what you were saying, and then that critical look to say, okay, there's an issue over here, and something's not quite working, and that's a policy. How is that then being transferred to getting on the agenda or in front of Councillor Southworth and myself to then bring that up so that we can bring that into the fore, and maybe through that might be the work through those committee portfolio holders to bring that to us. But at a staff level, is that critical view happening and that critical analysis to say,
yeah, there's some issues here, or there's actually an opportunity here, rather than just saying, yeah, this is all business as planned, it's business as usual, let's go ahead. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that's happening.
So, I mean, one of the mechanisms that we've got that for each of the 3 core services, we have a core service leadership group, and that's got director membership on it, and then members from across science, strategy and operations. And so as part of that, that's looking at those priorities and those linkages between delivery and strategy. So that's a very practical mechanism by which the staff are bringing those two sort of considerations and together. So through those core leadership groups would be one mechanism, but we definitely can think about how we give that greater visibility to you as a council.
Okay.
I'm going to take it away. I don't think it's quite answered the question. I don't think it's fair to ask this right now, but it is something that's just spurred in my mind. So we'll take it away and we'll try and do some better work on that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McKenzie.
Well, just to further that conversation, if I may, Madam Chair, it seems to me that your answer to Dion and Dion's question to you, the bit that was missing is the governance understanding of, which is what Dion's asking for, is that report of that strategic. So, because the danger is that as councillors, we interfere with your program by demanding you do this or do that, out of sequence, out of budget, whatever it is. So getting that better coordination, I think that's what Dion's asking for, is to, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Scott, did you... Some things to say, okay, because I could sort of see, I felt like your hand was going up, but I wasn't sure if it was definitely. So Councillor Chair Pauling.
Yeah, it's all right. Kia ora. Yeah, it's a lot, really good discussion, because I think, it's all new. We're still in the early phases of how we've restructured the committees. Understandable that we probably have a few things to update and work on. And I know Ian had a really good point earlier on in a discussion that we'd had around, himself as a core service lead, putting a few other councillors alongside him to support that, so there's going to be a bit more discussion with the core service lead group from staff. So I think that's a good idea. Let's take that offline, like Dion said, and try and figure that out. But just in terms of the Mayoral Forum grant, I think keep an eye on the Chair's reports and the council meetings, because I do update everybody about the meetings and the Chair's report. And so the February meeting, so the Mayoral Forum meeting coming up in a couple of weeks, and then our council meeting on the 25th, it'll be in my Chair's report about the topics that were discussed. So that's a good place to check back and see what's happening. There's lots of things happening at the Mayoral Forum, of course. Not all of them we're the lead for, so you just got to be cognizant of that. The things we are, you do know about them, the climate change stuff that we've done, the energy strategies in its early days. That's something that our staff are working on. And the zone committee stuff, as you know about. So I think you're pretty well up to date with that. The economic stuff was a workshop late last year. We're still formulating what that means. And that's coming through, and it is linking to the regional deal stuff that was released by government, etc. So it's still in formulation. There's nothing really to talk about just yet, but I'm across it, and so is Stephanie, because we both attend the Mayoral Forum and we share as much as we can there. But yet, note that it can be better, and it will come through the Chair's reports at each council meeting. All good?
Has any other councillors got a question they want to ask at this point? No. So just one I had, and I think it's probably sort of feeds into some of what's been discussed, and I'll ask it specifically around the Environment Canterbury Climate Action Plan, but sort of true for other things too, is we've acknowledged that that's something that's sort of been received through this committee and sort of signed off. But obviously it's actually the actions that are the most important part then. And so sort of my question is, where do we see that? Because some of those things might be continuing to come through strategy and policy, other things perhaps most specifically sit in delivery. And so again, it's just, what's the mechanism? How will we see the various aspects, and then where they're moving on into the next part of the organisation, and just for us to be able to keep track. Yeah. So how will that work?
So that engagement plan and delivery of that will primarily be reported back through the Regional Delivery Committee, but I will invite Jesse just to provide a bit more background on how that's going to happen.
Kia ora, councillors. So we're in the process of developing and monitoring our evaluation and reporting plan for the Climate Action Plan, ECAN's Climate Action Plan, but also the Climate Change Partnership Plan at a regional level. We will be reporting back through the quarterly and annual reporting process. There will be, as the Chair just mentioned, some items that will come back and will need to be discussed at a more strategic level, but other things will be reported back through the Regional Delivery Committee as part of that quarterly and annual reporting on the Climate Action Plan. You've got to remember a lot of the actions are work that is undertaken through the businesses planned work that we do. So there's an inherent link between the work that we're reporting on anyway that delivers on the same outcomes in the Climate Action Plan. So there's all that linkages that we're making, and so that'll all be encompassed within those reporting frameworks.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I think that's all questions. So staff, if you'd like to.
Great, thank you for that feedback. And I just see that sort of in a sort of closing comment, we will take that all on board. We've got a meeting set up with the chair next week, so we'll really good feedback for us to. With this, it was really the purpose of this, so we could get that feedback and use it to develop the workshop. So it's really useful.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. Okay, so we have the recommendation for this. Couple of recommendations there on the board. Here we are on the board. So endorsing the next steps, and we've had the discussion on the feedback and provided feedback. So can I have a mover for these recommendations? Chair Pauling, seconder, please. Councillor Edge. Okay. So I will open up for discussion at this point. So Councillor Scott, you'd already signalled you wanted to add something in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I guess along the lines of where Dion was trying to go to, we spent a lot of time in this triennium setting up these two committees. And in my own mind, it's for purity of purpose. That's why they're there. So strategically, we need to look at, what do we need to do? Where do we need to be, and how do we get there? So that's a strategic thing. And then through influencing policy, through the long-term plan and the annual plan, then that's how we get that leverage to get to where we need to do. And then the delivery gets reported back through the Regional Delivery Committee. I would not like to think that we get too wide in our discussions about the things that are important to us. We haven't got a lot of time left, for one thing, and we need to set a reasonable agenda for the next council that comes in to follow this, so that we don't get confused on what our roles are. Strategy and policy is there to create and influence, and therefore shape an annual plan or a long-term plan, or some government, through policy to the government to submission process. That's how I see that. I see it as a very pure role. And if we start thinking too wide from that, I think we're going to get confused. That's the point I'd like to make.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. And something that I've actually said to staff in the sort of pre-meeting for this was that I really want to make sure we stay focused on what we can do as Environment Canterbury, because a very large part of the paper, or the papers, our agenda today, is a whole load of information about submissions to the government and so on. And both last government term and this government term, there's all this stuff coming through, and we're sort of constantly responding and trying to put all our thoughts through in that part. And I really think that we need to make sure that actually what we do here and what our long-term and sort of mid-term goals are, and how we're working and what we have some certainty around, that we keep on making sure that stays as priority, and we don't get too distracted by putting lots of time and energy to everything that's being sort of thrown at us. So, welcome other councillors' perspectives on that. That was sort of where I got to. I think Councillor Swiggs probably agreed with me when I made that comment. But yeah, happy to take other people's thoughts and on other things you want to add in here at this point. So, anyone else? Councillor Edge?
Okay. No, look, I think this is going to be really useful, what that comes out of this. The thoughts that I have is that we're transitioning away from the portfolio mentality to a broader, holistic, integrated approach about how we do everything. And I think we're still kind of in that framework in mind, ensuring that whatever we do, we are looking at the various parcels of things and the various aspects of something that all contribute to an end vision. And that may go back to the strategic direction, long-term plan, in terms of the strategies and policies to make that deliverable, and the regional delivery committee. For example, the river resilience. I talked this morning about, remove the word resilience and talk about management. Resilience is part of the management of a river catchment system, and there are a whole lot of other parts to it. And for us at the moment, we've come from something called braided river revival, catchment management, land ownership issues, interagency cooperation, corridors, Kiutakitai, all of those sorts of things fit into the river, as well as biodiversity, biosecurity. So what is strategically the best way of handling that? It's a broader thinking, in my view, and it's a multi-values approach, and it's exactly the approach that we have in our 30-year infrastructure plan as part of our LTP, and it's in black and white about our future direction. And we have a 100-year plan which talks about all sorts of things. It's that blue chart with various drawdowns, and it is comprehensive. And I think that hopefully will come out of what we're looking at. In terms of economic development strategy, I'm really interested in what the Mayoral Forum are doing, because we're linking in terms of the Canterbury picture, the Canterbury plan, and it's a document that's been prepared, and it's is it just sitting there? And related to that are again our land and the land of other territorial authorities and other parcels of land that kind of all join up with us. But there's lots of opportunities too. And we talked a lot last year about what is our potential for investment opportunities. And we have had a lot of discussions about solar energy and being smarter and about how we use our land, changing the leasing arrangements of the land, and then PT assets, how can that do? So those sorts of things obviously will come forward. I mean, even for us, going back to the river side of things, or recreation and tourism, we now have a Minister of Finance who is suggesting that we need to boost tourism. It's a big economic earner for our GDP, and especially Canterbury. And I'm thinking, well, we now have a Canterbury Minister of Tourism on our back door. And I think we took it out of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, or diminished its importance in the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, but it's all there. It's all telling us that we have people and economic potential within that aspect of our business. And of course, climate change actions. Biodiversity, for example, too, about what are the economic gains to be made from improving biodiversity, dealing with biosecurity issues. So all of those sort of things come into the general picture of a broader assessment of economic development. And in terms of the Audit and Risk Committee, that's something that we'll look at with our new chair and our new independent member. Got a meeting next week just to talk about that strategic direction and what ideas they may have in terms of contributing to the strategy and policy work that we're talking about here today. So there is a link up with how we spend money, how we get assurance and risk assessment of what we're doing. And I think the issue that Dion's talking about how this interrelationship between strategy and policy and regional delivery, how are they interrelated? How do we know in a risk assurance way that the Regional Delivery Committee is working properly, and what's the synergy between that and the Audit and Risk Committee? So there's still a bit of work to do, but it's, the ideas are there, and it's just bringing them forward and ensuring that we're all up to speed with a future direction.
Yeah, thank you. So I think maybe that's we should hook up the core service leads and Audit and Risk Delivery and me, just get together and get sorted for 25. So Councillor Sunkel, you wanted to.
I guess, I'm marginally confused with the role of some of the conversations, and river resilience is one of our core statutory responsibilities. So we can't just talk about the river and go, and we'll do about that bit about the river resilience, because that is a statutory responsibility. So it is very clear that we have that role, that statutory role, which means we must do. So we can't sort of just wind it into a holistic view of the world and look at other matters. Yes, we need to be holistic in our approach, but we do have statutory roles, and resilience is one of them. And I put my civil defence hat on. Resilience is absolutely a priority to what we need to do. So discounting resilience at this table, I would be very concerned if we did that, because very, very core part of our statutory roles and responsibilities. I guess for me, when I'm looking at policy or thinking about strategy is about what does that big picture into the future look like, and I just don't see where we have those conversations. We can talk about specific policies and stuff we want to do, as Councillor Edge has elucidated, but how do we get to a point where we cut to the chase and we change policy and allow consenting, we make ourselves enabling to achieve outcomes? Those are the roadblocks that I see that we should be, I guess, focusing on progressing to achieve outcomes. Delivery over there does the delivery stuff. What are the roadblocks to delivery achieving the outcomes? If rivers can't do something, or we can't do something in biodiversity, or we can't do something in whatever matter we're discussing, it comes back to us to think about what are the roadblocks, unblocking the drain and allowing things to happen. So I think we just need to be really thinking about what does a big picture in the future look like? How do we minimise the regulatory process and maximise our outcomes? Just some of the thoughts for me. And I would be interested into knowing what the audit and risk conversations have been over the last month, because there's a whole bunch of us that have no idea what's being said, organised or set forth as a process for audit and risk. And we would be interested in knowing.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor, actually we've got Councillor Swiggs.
Just wanted to bring a bit of light to the table. I'm really encouraged that I heard Councillor Edge talking about economic development. I'm quite buoyed by that. However, the ship has sailed a little bit because we don't have full well-beings in our local government act anymore. And one of those was economics. So doesn't mean we can't do things, but it's we've just got to face the reality of what we've got now. But what I was going to say, and this is actually on me, I could have picked this up a long time ago when we were looking at these agendas, is point number 1 on our resolutions. I'm really keen for resolutions to stand on their own 2 feet, and making sure that we, when resolutions are made, they're actually specific rather than just referencing something into papers. But I should have picked that up, so that's on me, but I'm happy with where we're going.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
A perfect segue to what I was going to say, because in terms of the proposed workshop on page 20, points 14 to 16, what it doesn't say there is how we're going to make progress on these issues, which goes back to John's point about all the things that we should be thinking about in terms of a overarching approach for strategy. Because, to quote my learned colleague here, Councillor East, we don't want to develop strategies that end up on the top shelf gathering dust. We want strategies that are actually working documents. And We don't talk here about how we're going to make progress, and I think perhaps the working groups, as part of that progress, we can help to deliver on this program you're trying to implement, Madam Chair.
We do have, staff can correct me if I'm wrong here, but we have the process, I understand it, is that we do then bring every quarter, isn't it? We bring an update on sort of what's in the next 3 months, and we've got the long term fixed out, which is all incorporated in the budgets that we've agreed to in the long term plan. So there is a process of things coming back, and the workshop on the 27th is really sort of seeing, is there some things here that are missing that we need to put more focus or attention to, and then how do we put that into the sort of budgets and the capacity that we have already identified.
Sorry, we're at cross purposes here. I don't dispute anything you've said, but that's not what I'm trying to refer to. Sorry, I wasn't clear, but here you talk about reviewing proposed items for committee to work forward program. Good. Identify and prioritise items to progress further. That's good. But what we don't say is how we're going to action those priorities. You know, what's the mechanics of actually saying we have a whole lot of strategies, for example, in river management or river resilience or whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get into that debate. How do we rationalise that into an overarching strategy? For example, in public transport, you know, how do we? What's the strategy about that going forward? How do we consolidate that into a real working document and not something that just gets put on? And so it's not about us reporting back. It's about how we do the work to enable coordination. It's the discussion we were having earlier here about coordinating the staff effort with the governance effort to make sure we're bringing the community view into this so that people understand what it is we're doing, what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think you've picked up on that. We are looking. I know we have got a member of staff looking at all of our sort of strategies and guidelines and plans, and looking at how they overlap or don't, and gaps and those types of things. So that is something I believe is coming back at a later date. I'm not sure if we've got deadline dates in there yet, but we'll. We are looking at specifically that issue, because if it's all really clear and succinct, it's easier, isn't it, to keep our eyes across things and make sure that things progress through those strategies rather than just sort of disappear out of view. So yeah, but I'm sure you'll keep us on it as well, Ian. Thank you. So is that anyone else? Have we reached the end? I think that's the end of our discussions on that one. So thank you everyone for your input there. So all those in favour, we've got a mover and seconder, all those in favour of the recommendation supporting, please say aye. Any against? No? Okay, so that's carried. Thank you. Okay. So now we're moving on to item 8.2, which is a late paper. I don't know quite how that comes through on the public, because it wasn't in the public, or was it? It went into the public originally, the agenda. It's tabled. Okay, sorry. So let me find my thing. So I invite a member of staff to come to the table and can explain these things. And so Olivia Cook, who's our Principal Strategy Advisor, is going to introduce this report. So thank you, Olivia, for coming to the table. So I'm sure will fill us in on all the details and give an overview of the submission that is in this part of our agenda. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Just confirming you can hear me. Okay, great. So this item 8.2 relates to a paper seeking approval of a council submission on the Resource Management Consenting and Other Matters Amendment Bill. So the paper was included in the agenda pack. The draft submission was circulated separately, is publicly available on the council's website. So just to clarify that. So this bill proposes changes to the Resource Management Act. It's significant for the council in that a number of the changes will impact on the council's statutory functions, including consenting, compliance, monitoring and enforcement, but it also has impacts for our communities, our partnerships and our relationships with other stakeholders. The bill itself is part of the phase 2 reforms of government. So there's a third package of resource management reforms coming later this year, and this set of changes is intended to lay the way or lay the foundation for those future changes that will come through the system. Public submissions close on the bill on the 10th of February, so that is Monday. We have Waitangi Day in between, and staff have worked to make sure that this submission is available for you to discuss today. So I have put a bit of time and effort into trying to make sure you have that opportunity to discuss it. In developing the submission, we've taken a two-step process. So prior to Christmas, draft submission points were circulated to councillors for review and feedback. And then subsequently in January, a draft submission was also circulated for review. In terms of the general approach of the submission, we've tried to welcome changes that will improve our regulatory and statutory functions, but also recognise some areas where restraint may be required, and particularly around local decision making, participation opportunities, and any impacts on effectively our CME, compliance, monitoring, enforcement and consenting functions. Paragraphs 13 and 14 of the paper set out the suggested areas for support and opposition in the submission. I'm happy to run through those if you would like, otherwise welcome to take them as read. But generally, where the focus of the submission is recognising that there are some changes that are helpful for the council, while there are other changes where we think amendments are needed. And throughout, we've tried to offer practical solutions and suggestions for how the bill could be improved to help in those areas. Happy to hand back to the chair for any questions, unless you'd like me to elaborate further on a point.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to questions. I've got Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora te mana, e mihi atu ka koe, Olivia. Thank you for this paper, because I know that this is kind of the second amendment of the RMA. And it's really good to see that, and I really support the fact that we're opposing the extended consent durations for occupational permits for ports. They're wanting another 20 years. So I really support that. And also giving the Act actually more teeth to deal with those that contravene the RMA. I think what I would like to concentrate on, though, is a point that's being made in it's number 82. And I know that, talking about Section 8, I mean, that was really relevant at the first, amendment bill that was put forward. I'm just wondering if it is prudent enough to actually reiterate the situation around Section 8 of the RMA, because I know that we supported the fact is that it needed to remain in there because of the acknowledging the Treaty of Waitangi. This bill, though, and I'm just looking at that 82, and it's just the way I believe that we worded this, because what it doesn't reflect is the fact that we have a partnership with Ngāi Tahu, and always saying really here is that we are encouraging the government to engage with or consult with Ngāi Tahu to ensure changes can be made that provide for their interests. I just think that we actually should be possibly a little bit more proactive in this as a partner, and explain exactly how we feel about that with the partner, as opposed to just encouraging the Crown. So I just thought that the wording possibly should reflect the the active partnership that we have with Ngāi Tahu. And obviously, I'm not whether you've engaged with strategy and influence at Ngāi Tahu, to discuss this matter. I've actually sent a message to the Kaiwhakahaere and Deputy Kaiwhakahaere to actually try and include it in the kōrero that they will have with the Prime Minister tomorrow at Onuku, exactly about this point. It'll be really good for our Kaiwhakahaere of ECAN actually to be part of that, to actually emphasise how actually important it is that as a partnership we really truly want to ensure that the Crown hears this particular point, because it's okay. I mean, how you're describing this, it actually is about, consulting with Ngāi Tahu and in the Act, but it's not actually clear or heavy. It's not direct enough as to who should be actually involved. So thank you. That's my whakaaro. Te mana.
Yeah, sorry, I'm assuming that we were going to get a response. So I was waiting for that.
Kia ora. It is working. Kia ora, and acknowledge the language here is perhaps not as direct as it could be. We have throughout the submission endeavoured to recognise Ngāi Tahu rangatiratanga over the Ngāi Tahu takiwa, and that is throughout the submission, and highlighted that we have concerns that these provisions, and particularly the reliance on treaty settlements, are too narrow to provide for mana whenua participation opportunities. I would be guided by the committee here as to what changes are up for discussion through this process, but definitely we could look to make an amendment if that would satisfy the committee, just to reference active partnership and our expectations in that. We do also, at the start of the submission, right up front in the introduction, talk about our concerns on that. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, because in point 7, you actually make it quite clear around that. But I just thought that 82, you've actually got a live example, and maybe, maybe there's a word before encourage, like strongly or something like that, would help. So I know that the general language in this in number 7 is identifying the fact about treaty settlements, but then go to the live example and emphasise it again. Anyway, that's my whakaaro. Kia ora, te mana.
Okay, thank you. So I think perhaps at if everyone's comfortable with that, we can maybe have some feedback on that in the discussion point, but acknowledging that Olivia can add something, and perhaps check it with Councillor Karakia, is that?
I know. Whatever. I've made my
made your
my
point and what gets incorporated. Great.
Yeah, I'll leave it to this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. Really well done. Another good piece of work from you. My question really is around the ports thing and the opposition to that, and there's no sort of extended conversation about that in the paper, other than to say that it's not required. So, what is the concern on that?
Kia ora. Two concerns principally. One is that if we provide extended consent durations for specific activities, we are potentially going into a regime where we are seen to be favouring particular activities rather than taking an effects-based management approach. The second is that if you extend consent durations for an activity, that precludes the opportunity to look at policy settings to manage that activity through upcoming plan processes. And so it's mainly those two issues that have been raised. We do have quite enabling settings in our plan currently, and a desire, I think, to make sure that you as council retain decision-making around policy. And so it was just that concern.
Clarification around that. So, in essence, it goes against our responsibilities, philosophically goes against why we're here anyways. So that is why that's there, other than any hard and fast rule. Thank you.
Okay, come to that. Okay, then I have Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Olivia. I particularly like the fisheries related comment that you provided. Thank you for that. Just noting that there's a wee spelling mistake in the Māori name for hectares, which is Tutu Maere Kure. So there's the I missing in the middle, but that's all right. Very basic. The concern I have is actually with regarding to permitted activity rules for discharges, particularly the suggestion that we've put in there is the removal of, subsection 1G over a period of time specified in the rule. I think we need certainty on an outcome process in order to allow for accurate outcomes. Otherwise, there's really no point in modelling if we can't have an end date. We can't have accurate numbers. So I query the changing of it, particularly because it's still earmarked for, court. I don't think we should be feeding too much into that narrative, and particularly adding things to it by saying that particular specifications within the rule should be deleted. I don't think it's really our place to say should or, but that's my opinion. Yeah, that's the most thing. I also, I know you need to be able to chance to reply. Sorry,
I was just wondering if we let Olivia cover
Yep.
that first.
Yep.
If your next question's on a different part, that might be the easiest way to make sure we get each thing done.
Kia ora. So in terms of how the bill is currently drafted, it requires a reduction in effects over a time period specified in the rule. The concern that has been raised is that this may actually limit our ability to carry out our compliance functions, and I'll make it a live example for you. If we were to have a permitted activity rule that said that a resource user had to reduce their adverse effect by a future date, then the consequence is that when that compliance officer goes out, they will not be able to determine whether that rule has been complied with. What we know from case law, and particularly the countdown case, is that rules have to be certain and enforceable, and any objective assessment has to be able to be carried out. So we're actually raising the issue in the context that this may limit our functions. If I also look back at our land and water plan, we do not have rules currently in place that require effects to be reduced by a particular future date on that very reason. I'd also note that a couple of regional councils have raised this issue and the concerns that they have around their ability to carry out their statutory functions. So just want to make it clear that this is to make sure that we're in a better position to be able to create rules that are enforceable.
Do you want to extend on this topic? Because I'll also like to ask a question.
So with regards to timelines and outcomes, they're conditions within particular consents, though, aren't they? So is that the narrative we're going to go down, as putting better conditions within consents, or just allowing permitted activities with rules? Or
So the context for this discussion is simply the permitted activity rule. How this usually works out in practice is that a plan might specify particular limits or target states that we would want to achieve over a period of time. We then translate those into rules, and we do that by imposing specific constraints around the scope and the type of the activity, or by imposing limits on, for example, a discharge quality. Those are easy to enforce in the sense that they're very objective, and so that is how those limits and those future dates gets translated into the rules. I would just stress that we are trying to make this as enforceable as possible.
So yeah, if I can sort of voice how I think it works, and you can tell me if I'm so. And because I think you're answering the question that I was going to have. So when we do the planning framework, which has both the things that will need to go down a consent route, And then this is specifically talking about things that would be permitted, therefore doesn't need a consent. And we've been talking about that already quite a bit this morning, that's the direction we want to try and go in, with a step up in the compliance as well, to make sure that those permitted activities are done within their what they're allowed to do. When we do our framework, we would absolutely have the outcomes we're expecting that framework to achieve, which would what we have as permitted would support and deliver by the dates that are within the overarching framework. And as long as people are complying with that and so on, and we've got the compliance to make sure, then that would actually give those outcomes. We can have some certainty around dates. We would have the science monitoring and checking in the broader picture that things are working, so we can understand if we need to tighten up on permitted activities, either through a compliance or through a change in the permitted activity rules. Is that what you're talking about here?
That's absolutely what I'm talking about. So we would still continue to have those limits, those time periods, those target dates in the plan, and then they get reflected through in terms of how we apply those limits in the permitted activity rule. Yeah.
So the permitted activity rules totally do deliver on those dates and targets. It's just that they're not explicitly linked
specify
to the rule and to the individuals doing the activities.
Correct.
It's a more,
Yep.
Okay, so I'm much more comfortable with what that's saying now. I understand that better. So if anyone else has got any other question on that specific topic, would you like to raise that, and we can discuss later? Okay, lovely, thank you. So hold on, I've got now, so Councillor Robinson, you had some more questions you wanted to ask?
Yeah, just one more question, actually. It's just regarding 69 and 70, those parts. About 35-year consent durations and long-lived infrastructure. And you said in the submission it's appropriately narrow with a focus on permanent structures and physical assets for social wellbeing. Does large water storage and irrigation schemes come under that?
No, the definition is very narrow, so it's only specific types of infrastructure, things like pipelines. Irrigation infrastructure and water storage is not mentioned. What the bill does allow for is for future regulations to be made to include other types of infrastructure. However, the government would be required to consult on whatever that regulation would be. So at the moment, no, it does not.
Okay, yep.
So in section 70, just relating to that, using of water for hydrogeneration is not within scope of these provisions, but so what about for hydrogeneration and the water storage facility? That's included.
So the facility and this is where it gets quite technical, so the drafting in the bill is that they provide for facilities that would enable hydrogeneration. What we have said in the submission is that it needs to be really clear that the take and the use of water is not enabled under that 35-year duration, and that some clarification on that would be helpful. There's a clear intent through the other provisions relating to renewable energy that hydro activities are to be excluded where it relates to the take and use of water. So this is mainly about making sure that what the government has expressed in its intent in some provisions is also accurately reflected in the other provisions. Yep.
Apologies for just, it's confusing in some cases because sometimes there's storage that's used for essentially for hydro, but then there's a part of that that's used for other activities. So how would the changes specify what is, I know it's a take and use thing, but it has to be ultra specific or not able to be used like that anymore. That's why.
So I can respond on that. So the simplest thing that the bill could do is specify the type of permits that are covered. And it's our understanding from the bill that this is mainly to enable land use permits, so the use construction of the structure, not the take and the use of the resource. So that's how the change could be facilitated, is to actually state which permits this provision applies to.
I think we need to really clarify that in our submission, to be quite definitive with the activity, like really accurate with it. That's just my opinion.
I was just going to say, we do have a sentence that says this is supported by the council, but we recommend changes, is at 69, potentially by specifying the type and scope of permits covered, just to try and be really explicit on that. Well, welcome to any suggestions if we could do something to make it clearer.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there may be a bit of back and forth on that, so then we all have a look at. No? Does anyone else feel we can talk about it in discussion, but see if that needs anything tightening or otherwise we can, yeah. Okay, so then we've got, well, is this on this?
Don, so we're talking on 68, 69, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the duration of a consent. Yeah, I had some worries about our current, the idea of a 35-year consent duration, even though it might be an infrastructure thing. And I wondered if there's a mechanism that you could shorten that, because things change over time. Communities' thoughts about things change, environment changes, the threats to the environment might change. If you made that, for example, a 20-year duration, but part of the condition would be, or the expectation is that at that time there's a review and there's further extensions to that, so that there is an element of being able to withdraw some activity that is unintentionally causing problems, and that's part of the issue that we've got today, is that we've got long-term 30-year consents, and we're discovering that they're not being addressed. So I just, that's from my thought. How could you still put a time period on it, but be a little bit flexible about it, to give us the opportunity or future, it's a future proofing problems.
Do you want to, because what I heard was it was a very narrow range of things that would have that long term, and there are some things which, the investment is so enormous that really I feel like 35 years is, realistically, they're really good things are going to be there for the next 50 to 100 years. So and I've got various, okay, I've got, so, but yes, Olivia, do you want to?
Yes, it is a very narrow framing. I was just trying to find in the bill itself the definition of long-lived infrastructure. We are needing to, balance that need to recognise that we have infrastructure deficits in New Zealand that have to be addressed, and investment certainty is one of those things that is required to make sure that investment occurs. As a regional council, our principal concerns are generally relating to the use of those natural resources, not the construction of the facilities. So the staff's advice was that it was reasonably satisfied, given the narrow definition and given the suggestion around restricting the type and scope, that would be sufficient. But I think it is a matter that the council and this committee would need to reach a position on.
Okay. Councillor Sunkel, because it's on this one, you want to?
It is. I guess thanks, because I would be vehemently opposed to the idea of shortening consents for those significant infrastructures, as has been advised in the thoughts that. So I'll just stop it there. You cannot have investment in billions of dollars and then pull the consenting back and say, "Oh no, we'll have another look at it in a couple of years' time." I mean, facetious, but even 20 years in that sort of environment is a couple of years' time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, did you want to add different to that?
Well, yeah, basically on the same point, really. And I mean, the purpose of the Resource Management Amendment Bill was to progress government priorities, which are economic development and progressing social outcomes. I mean, that's very clear. I can't understand how you can argue for long-term consents for infrastructure, but not long-term consents for the use of the resources that the infrastructure is built to use for. So, I mean, I think you need to revise your position on that, because there's no point in having a 35-year consent to put in pipework if you're not allowed to actually use the resources that pipework's designed to deliver, to use. And that's a nonsense. Clearly, if you want economic development, which is the priority of this government, you've got to have long-term consent to enable that investment. And I guess my question really is to you is because that's the tone of the submission, is that we're against economic development. We want to put in so many safeguards on any any amendments to the Resource Management Act that the government tries to bring in to actually enable stuff, that we want to say no to all that. And I note in comments around ministerial powers, you say we don't want the ministers to be able to enforce us to implement changes to MPSs. But at the same time, we have legal challenges from AWA or from the EDI or from ELI, which actually requires us to change our plan regardless of the consultation we've had with our communities and the support for communities for those existing land and water plans we have in place. So I'm not sure that the tone of the submission is actually enabling the stuff that the government is trying to enable. We're just saying no to all that. So perhaps you could make a comment on that.
Certainly. I would say that the tone of the submission is largely balanced. It actually welcomes a lot of the proposed changes, but generally urges restraint in relation to issues that impinge on local decision making and participation. In terms of the first point around us urging the government not to allow longer durations for the take and use of water, the submission doesn't say that. It states that the proposals have clearly said that they are not going to put out 35-year durations for hydro generation. All this point in the submission is doing is stating if that is the intent, as government has signalled, then some clarification in the provisions around long-lived infrastructure would help avoid legal debate, because the government has said that that's their intent. Just trying to think of the other questions. In terms of the consenting and the sort of regulatory aspects, the submission is largely welcoming a lot of those improvements to the consenting processes and making sure that things can get done quicker. So I think it is largely encouraging.
That's not the way I read it. I mean, you're saying we don't want to take advice from central government. There's a whole lot of stuff here. But
Sorry, that was the other point you raised. So the ministerial intervention and plan making, what that proposal is that the minister could direct a council to amend its plan to address any non-compliance with a national policy statement. The submission says there are mechanisms already in place under the RMA to set timeframes, and that could be exercised. The concern is that if there was a direction from the minister to use that power, then there are implications for the delivery of council functions. There are funding implications because you may need to carry out unbudgeted plan changes, but there are also implications for the delivery of other council programs if you have to switch resourcing. So this is more just about making sure that the council retains its autonomy to keep those decisions.
But we're subject to legal challenges, which is taking away our autonomy anyway. So I don't see what's different between a ministerial intervention and a legal intervention from a ginger group, and we have to respond regardless. And and some of the safeguards you've got here about government intervention in terms of consenting and various other things seems to be tightening the system rather than enabling the stuff. That's my interpretation. And it seems to me that perhaps part of our problem is that we've already got too many specifics in our plans and therefore our rules, which actually makes changing our plans far more difficult than it should be.
sorry, I'm not sure if there's a question I can. Well, what I would say on the consenting thing is that we have welcomed pretty much every proposal to streamline and improve the efficiency of the consenting framework. The only one that there was concern raised with was the restriction on consent hearings, but the rest were welcomed.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my point of view, it felt balanced. I wanted some certainty around the piece I've asked a question on, but and there's always going to be the opportunity for people to make a legal challenge. That's the fair process that then lets us sort of the judicial system assess the situation and make a determination. It's not the same as being told, being given an edict by a minister as to how we will, and with no mechanism to sort of discuss and so on. So, yeah, I can see the difference there. But anyway, I've got Councillor Davies, if we can move on from this. No? Councillor Mackenzie, I had you next on this. I've got you. I'm going through the list. Have you done your thing now? It tied in with the other things. Then I've got Councillor Edge, but you maybe have asked your question again through the piece that other people have asked the questions. Right, okay, so you're next. Then I've got Councillor Sunkel. Then I've got Councillor Mackay for things that are outside of the discussion that's already been had or the question being raised. And then I've now got Councillor East, who's a late arrival to the party. So we'll get to you, David, a wee bit later on. Councillor, yeah, hopefully I've got everyone there.
Yeah, my question is more of a legal question regarding any comments that members may make regarding Section 70, given that there are court cases in train at the moment. I'm concerned that if I make derogatory statements about in our discussion about Section 70, that it might inhibit my ability at a later date to contribute to decision making on the accusation that I'm biased in my opinion. Can we have a legal opinion on that?
Sorry,
can I just jump in? Well, Grant, you shouldn't be making any derogatory statements because in our code of conduct, that's not what we do. So just, I know you use that word, but we shouldn't be making any derogatory comments, to be honest. Yeah, on anything.
Comments against or of concern, expressing concern, they're not necessarily derogatory, but expression of concern about some of the commentary in this submission that is a submission contributed and endorsed by this, presumably by this council, and it is, it is concerning.
Shall I invite
what the implications
Robin?
that might be? Can I get an opinion on that, please?
So, Council, would you like to respond to that question?
No.
Oh, that's not. No,
Kia ora, councillors. This is the substance of this paper is asking for your support in terms of the submission, and the submission does deal with Section 70, which is a mechanism that allows for an exception to the general rule that permitted activities have low environmental effects. And Olivia's set out quite clearly that we support that in principle. That's an entirely separate decision to any decisions that we would bring before a different forum in terms of the cases that the council is currently facing. This is not the appropriate forum, you're correct, Councillor Edge, to discuss the merits of any cases that are before council. But I believe that you can separate those two functions and still stay safe. So you're looking here to, do you support an exception to the general principle in terms of Section 70 to allow for permitted activity rules in degraded environments? And it's quite clearly set out in your submission what the government is proposing in that way. Is that what alleviate your concerns, or?
No, it just constrains me in terms of making commentary about some of these items. Obviously concerned about it. Yeah. There's some inference. There's some the conclusions or the commentary in some of these clauses is implying some things, and I was hoping to point those out, but I'm concerned that if I do that, that conflict between those things are potentially real, and so I feel constrained in my commentary. I'll just pick up on one thing in terms of Councillor Karako's discussion early on about item 82 as a way forward to make it very clear that we are in a partnership. And I'm wondering if the appropriate reference to how we engage with Ngāi Tahu and Runanga are somehow linked into our Turia agreement, which is, and the principles of the Turia agreement, but also our engagement significance in Maori participation policy, which means that we are embracing the views of our partners and saying that rather than asking them to go to the government, All right.
Yeah. Do we have questions?
Okay.
Fair enough.
My question is that...
Is it appropriate that we should be having a debate with staff?
Okay, sorry.
Madam Chair.
But we've asked the question, and we've had an answer. So your feeling is that inhibits you, but we have had an answer. Sorry, your button.
We've had an answer, and it's appropriate for me to seek an answer when we are dealing with something that is potentially legally.
Yeah, if you've got.
So I've explored that, and I'm satisfied that the answer doesn't suit me. But anyway.
Yeah. But it's clear, Robin. You've got nothing else to add to that. No. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, I've got a list of people on. I can come back around to the end if we've got some time still. So, Councillor Sunkel, you had some other things you wanted to ask about?
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to I guess critical infrastructure, and if I put my civil defence hat on, we've been having strong discussions with government and different parties about the definition of infrastructure, and our bridges and our roading is in my mind very critical in the infrastructure space, because if the bridge is out, we cannot perform our services to our wider community. And equally, when I look at our ports, that is critical infrastructure to the South Island of New Zealand when the roads and the rail goes out. So some real influence and significance of our ports. So I just wonder, our ports, and I apologise, my eyes aren't good enough to read everywhere, are our ports sitting in that infrastructure space as critical infrastructure, and therefore I guess deserving of longer term consents because of the critical nature to the functioning of social and economic when we come to disaster and disaster relief and the world that we live in. So just the question there, given those.
I don't have the definition of long-lived infrastructure in front of me, and the critical infrastructure definition is something that I think we will see more discussion on as the government releases its infrastructure and energy national direction proposals, which are coming later this year. The position on the ports is not one based on a policy position. It is simply that we wanted to make sure that the council had decision-making authority on matters relating to the marine environment, including consent durations. There are definitely forms of infrastructure which do provide for social well-being and for connection, and generally the council's position on those matters, as reflected through their policy statements, has been to recognise that. I'm not sure if there's much more I could probably offer on that topic, other than to acknowledge that critical infrastructure is something that is generally enabled. Yeah. In my mind, it is critical, and yes, I understand your explanation of giving an opportunity to one and not another, but I just wonder at times whether we are being so pure and not actually recognising the value of some of those structures that are critically important to our future things.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay? No? Okay. Councillor East? Is he there?
No, it's gone.
Oh. Okay. We can go. Chair Pauling?
Yeah, kia ora, Olivia. Just a really quick question. I know in number 13 we've got the council supports in principle, the following changes, and I was looking for where we've used the word support in principle further on in the document, and we haven't. Is there a difference when we say supports in principle? Because I'll ask that first because then I'll have an idea. But
There are some occasions where we've supported the intent of the provision, but the actual execution of that provision, we've suggested amendment. So it's effectively to acknowledge that. Yeah.
Because in particular, like around that, the Section 70 stuff, is it, because Robin mentioned support principle, is that a place where we'd say that? Because if we would, it's not written like that currently. It just says support. And that might help some councillors in the room in helping us make the decision. I don't know. But I just think it's worth it because I just didn't note where it says that specifically in our submission. But we've noted it right at the start, but it doesn't follow through. So just might be important to note that. And if that's the case, can you maybe tell us where would you use that and where wouldn't we? Is it? Sorry, I know it's quite specific, but I think it's important.
So Section 70 changes one particularly, where the relief that was offered in the bill didn't reflect what staff recommended as an appropriate solution. I would need to go through, I think, and one by one have a look at them, but the Section 71 was live in my mind at the time. Yeah.
As I've got it, it'll be clause 33 and 41 where that might be worth that amendment there, but yeah, all good. I'll leave it with you to follow that up. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Robinson, you had another point you wanted to raise.
Just with regards to Section 70 again, the 69 paragraph, I just thought maybe some wording for consideration would be to specify the type and scope of permits covered by the provision, maybe with the infrastructure may have one or more intended activity or purpose along those lines. So if it's a piece of infrastructure that may serve more than one purpose, I think we need to really define what is within that and what isn't. Does that make sense? Sort of, yeah. Sorry.
Yes, it makes sense. The one thing I would note is that infrastructure often provides a range of services or uses. We might be foreclosing potential opportunities, for example, where infrastructure is providing some form of resilience or providing use for the transport of gas, just multiple sorts of, I'm trying to put it into context of a real life example. If we had a pipeline that was providing gas conveyance or electricity conveyance alongside it, I'm just nervous about being overly limiting. And I think that the fact that they have those very narrow constraints around what type of infrastructure is enabled has effectively set the boundaries. But it is something I would take advice on from the committee. I'm just flagging that it may create unintended consequences, particularly if I think about the use of infrastructure for delivery of things like water or wastewater, where it might be trade waste, for example, that the pipeline's used for. It's just as I think it through, I'm just nervous about implications.
Okay. I've got Councillor East back in the room. Councillor East, you had a question? Councillor East, you had a question? Oh, button.
2 points. One, an error of fact. in section 10, this council has 14 elected members and 2 appointed Ngaitahu members. And secondly, I just wanted to clarify the resolution is that we, the proposed resolution is that we approve this submission. My question is if there are required changes to this, will we defer that approval or are we approving subject to change?
I think that's a matter for the chair to discuss about how these changes, if there are changes, are to be socialised and circulated. Noting that the submission timeframe is rapidly approaching.
Yep. So I think then through discussion we can see what things are sort of landing and want something we can go there. Right.
Just got a suggestion, and thanks, David, for raising that. It's a really good point. In the past, we've had a second resolution to like when we've been in sort of the process of resolutions where it can be signed out by the chair. I think that's normally the way it is. That could be a suggestion if people are happy that there will be some changes, and that will be sent around. And at the end of the day, I could sign that off before the 10th of February because it needs to. That's if we pass the resolution. So that's a suggestion that there could be a second. Oh, you've done it. There you go. Stop talking, Craig.
Okay, great.
I did have one other question, though, Vicky, if that's okay.
Yep.
It's in relation to the point 82 that Councillor Karakia brought up early on. It was just when I read through that, the second sentence in that paragraph, I'm not sure if that second sentence refers to what the bill. Cool. Because when you read it, it's like, is that what we currently do, or because it's a bit of an open-ended thing? So it just might be good to state that clearly that it's the bill that notes that only the consent. Yeah, and then that makes it feel better. And I do support, and when we get to discussion, I'll talk about that more. That we say something a bit more proactive in terms of our partnerships. Kia ora.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be helpful in response to potential amendment would be to get some more clarification around what exactly sits in that narrow, long-lived infrastructure, and also perhaps also what comes under critical infrastructure and how those do or don't line up. Does that sound sensible? And that can then help contribute into a conversation, like a bit of online following this meeting, and then we can then take that through that second resolution and see whether there's something we need to add in as a little specific in there. Okay, and Councillor Swiggs, you had another question?
Yeah, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for the submission. I think it's that you've written here. You've done really good work, so thank you and the team behind you that have done this. And I know there's been a lot of work in there. Obviously, there's some things in here that, as a personal view, that I might be have a slight different view on. But when I think about, take my personal hat off and put the hat of the function of the business of the council, I think it's quite balanced, so well done. I do have one question around the paper, and it's more maybe a suggestion, but it's just around the building of how these things get built and the engagement with councillors. Is there somewhere where we can start thinking about how we do that engagement? I could be in point 15, just elaborating on the councillors had feedback that went in. How did that feedback inform edits and things like that? I think that would be quite useful, especially just if we're wanting to have a bit more of an audit trail about how these things are built. That was a question. Can that be done in the future?
Yes, it can, and we have in previous submissions sort of set out the process for developing the submissions. I don't think in the past we've gone as far as to say how those points have been reflected, but that is something that we could look to build into the process.
That would be fantastic, and I think we should think about that, because in the light of our new kind of way of doing things, it would be just transparent, I think. One other question that I had relating to this submission, it's the only one I have, is around housing. And I know that there's nothing specific in this. We don't specifically talk about housing, but what the bill is doing is talking about housing quite a lot. And MDRS, the opt-out of MDRS, and councils, district councils, city council needing to develop 30-year infrastructure, 30-year housing plans. Now, those housing plans are very intrinsically linked to the opening up of land, which comes through our regional policy statement, which at the moment we have paused. Our regional policy statement was going to open up potentially some land for development. So these things are linked. So unintended consequences of what the government's done to us with the RPS is flowing through. So was there any thinking about that? Is there any thinking that we could potentially just make a note of those type of unintended consequences of different legislation that the government's trying to pull, and specifically relating to housing in our regional policy statement and land use and everything like that?
Yes, we didn't comment on housing simply because we were trying to focus on, I guess, the key issues or functions and priorities for council. If during discussion there was a desire to put a comment in around the implications of that, that could be done. I guess I just take direction from the committee on that matter. Often with these bills, we find that there's a plethora of changes throughout, and it's just that staff just try to focus generally on the ones of most importance, but we could do something.
No, thanks. I think, again, you've done a good job, so thank you.
It's great, yeah, and concur that you have. It's really thorough, as always. I really appreciate the foundations that you pulled together and the detail. It's really helpful. Thank you, Olivia. So if you'd like to leave the table, and then we can open up for discussion. Thank you. In fact, I need a mover and a seconder, don't I, for the recommendations. I've got Deputy Chair Swiggs has put his hand up to move. Councillor Sunkel seconding. So then I'll open up for discussion. Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and do I express my gratitude for the paper. The majority I agree with, but as Councillor Swiggs has said, there are those points in there that I find a little bit disappointing. I don't fit my own natural kind of biases and policies, but otherwise I am reasonably comfortable with what is in there. And I would be nervous if hearing some of the thoughts at the table about changes that might be made, being made and then the submission being submitted. So as it sits today, yes, I agree with most of it. There's bits I don't like, and I think we should just go forward with it. Yes, some corrections or a wee bit of clarification, but I don't want to see any great changes to it given the limited opportunity for any further discussion. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to thank staff for the opportunities that were given to us before Christmas to provide feedback, and the time and the effort that you've put in doing the drafting and getting the submission to this stage. I'm a bit like Councillor Sunkel. There is a couple of things in there that don't sit entirely comfortable with me, but by and large, I think it's an excellent submission representing this. I would be comfortable with the changes mooted for 82.82. Quite happy to have that strengthened and some clarity around that. I think when I've looked at, I did go and read the bill, quite complicated. But around the infrastructure stuff, I think that's pretty clear, and I don't think that we actually need to possibly tutu with that those points at all. So I will be supporting this today, even though it's not 100% comfortable with me, but very good submission. So thank you, staff.
Anyone else? Come, Councillor. Chair. Well, maybe Councillor Edge. Person, come.
Thank you. Yes, as I said before, and as it's been mentioned by Councillor Sunkel and Councillor Swiggs, I obviously have some concerns about various clauses within the submission. But our staff and ourselves as an organisation have been put in a really difficult situation by a government that is making significant changes to the RMA and the community's expectations about continuing to improve our environment are somewhat a bit ambiguous at the moment about which way that might go, with pending future changes to come as well. In this submission, I really just want to pick up item 44, or part of 44, and that's reference to changes related to section 70, where it says it's rare that a rule by itself delivers the level of improvements required, particularly where freshwater degradation is a consequence of the cumulative impact of current and historical activities. To address this, some changes are recommended. I support those changes, especially with the bits underlined, which refers to non-regulatory methods. We do have to reduce the numbers and extent of our resource consents. In my view, our land and water plan has committed us over time to be highly regulated, litigious document that we could have a different way of doing it if we looked more at as a non-statutory mechanism. And I lament the withdrawal of the regional policy statement, which to my mind would have gone a long way towards achieving, looking at things in a more bespoke fashion, freshwater management units, sub-catchment practices, and working with our community to develop strategies, guidance, and looking at things collectively. We operate under a system of site-specific consents, and we have the opportunity under that document to look at more broader sub-catchment approach, which using collectives to do that. And our community are going it alone anyway, in a collective fashion to deliver what they think. And I think for that, if that clause sticks and we do think outside the square, then we can take advantage of that to deliver something. The other clause in particular I wanted to pick up on was 73. In terms of the changes to section 128 of the RMA, there's a change there to enable review of resource consents. Not sure what the extent of that will be, but the comment on 73 that demonstrating an individual activity has met adverse condition test has been a barrier to consent reviews. I kind of don't really agree with that. If anything, those so-called barriers are actually a precautionary approach to allow a review to actually assess whether or not there has been continuing degradation or breaches or whatever. So I think it's probably a necessary part of that review process, and especially with its adverse effects do need to be assessed properly. I will support this submission. Lots of reservations, but we're in a bit of a bind, and our staff have done well, and I apologise to them for not contributing earlier with my comments, considering we had a little bit of time before Christmas, and only really reading it in the last few days, realising the extent of the submission and its contents. But we'll just see what happens with that. Thank you.
Chair Pauling?
Kia ora, Vicky. Just reiterate the acknowledgements of the staff, and especially Olivia for the work she's done and they've done. Really balanced submission, I think. We've got things we support, we've got things we're opposing. I'm happy to support it, but I do take note of the point that Councillor East made in point 10. Definitely need to tidy that up. As I said earlier on, and others have said, the Section 82 stuff would be good to put that more proactive bit in there and tidy that second sentence up. and also that support and principle stuff that I raised earlier on. I think that would be important to tidy up. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora, Te mana. I just want to reiterate the points that I made originally. Just to comment on point number 10. The reason I never commented about that because I thought that brothers like David East, they've come to the conclusion that we were elected by our Papatupa Runanga. And so, you know, that was kind of seeing that we're sharing the love now and not actually trying to separate us, you know, as to those that were appointed as opposed to elected. So I'll just leave it there, actually. The next part of it is that, just to go through, I do and reiterate again my thanks to staff on this submission. You've got to be in it to win it. We may not win it, all of it, but you've got to be in it. So, and I know that, you know, there's a really close timeline. I'm really, there was a question around extended consent durations for occupation permits by ports. Again, in the Mana Whenua Treaty Settlement one, there was a live example. There is a live example going on actually in Whakatau that we could have used, but obviously let's not go there yet. So I as I say, I talk with that. There was also another one around rules only to be included in plans where the purpose is for delivering functions relating to the maintenance of Indigenous biodiversity. Again, that is very, very important, particularly to what is happening around all of those sort of coastal kitai activities that Mana Whenua actually undertake within the ikan rohe. The other one is, again, and I reiterate the point of number 7, that you have made it, and thank you for, you know, allowing us to sort of present and you taking up the rako to actually give it more of a, make it stronger as to reflect the partnership between Ngāi Tahu and Environment Canterbury, and also taking on board what Chair Pauling said as well, actually about, you know, more, probably articulating one of the points earlier better. I think the other part, and I know that, you know, I kind of said that it's good that we're actually supporting the fact that we're kind of giving this more teeth, particularly those who contravene the RMA, but probably better way to explain that is that I know that we can't rescind you know, any of the consents, but what we can do if this is successful is that you know, we can change the conditions, or the conditions can be changed, not us, the conditions. And so I think that's a positive step forward, you know, particularly with giving the RMA actually, well, more teeth. So thank you, and I am going to support this with the amendments. Kia ora tata.
Kia ora. So I have Councillor East.
Thank you. Look, I note comments from Councillor Swiggs, Councillor Mackay and Councillor Sankel about praising the work of staff, and but also having some reservations about aspects of the submission. I share that sentiment, but unfortunately my reservations to that extent that I can't support this submission at this stage, or I won't support this submission. I'll leave that at that, and perhaps just in reply to Councillor Karakia, I wonder he might like to submit his expenses for election and compare them with those of the rest of us.
Kia ora. So I think that's everybody who wants to speak has now. Yeah, it is. Oh, you now, Councillor Swiggs. Okay. Okay. Got you. Go on then.
All right. Well, I'll close off then. I will support it. Good work from staff. This bill, if passed, is a fundamental change to how resource management is managed, or resources are managed in New Zealand. So, I mean, it is a big deal, this bill. And the big thing for us is the shifting away from the decision making around this table or around this council, not necessarily this table, but this council, to more centralised ways of doing things. Now, that's a big change. It's massive. So I don't think we can underplay the massive impact that will have on the businesses planned that we have in our long-term plan, and our aspirations for localised decision-making and localised management of resources in different areas. Because we're going to get sort of potentially one size-fits-all things. And we all know in this council that different areas of our region have different land, have different, that the activities on that land has different impacts. We won't have a say necessarily in how that looks. And that's one of the big things that I'm concerned about. It's touched on in our submission. And I do hope through the process that there's an appreciation from the government that they can see that localised decision making is still really important and really vital. One of the things that I'm really personally concerned about is the transferring and the oversight of that critical function of freshwater farm plans to third parties. How can we do our compliance and monitoring, or our monitoring and compliance, if we don't get the data about what's going on? Now, I know my colleagues across the table and beside me may have a different view of that, but that's my view. It's not necessarily being big brother by a regional council, but it's actually about getting the right data so that we can actually make good land use changes and land use planning around what we're doing in our region, so that we can both have good economic impacts, encourage our farming communities to get better value for what they're doing, improve our economies right throughout by doing better, rather than just shipping dry milk powder offshore. This bill for me, and I'm not going to raise it, and I don't think we need to raise it necessarily in an amendment around the housing thing, but I will say it. This bill is, we've got a government that wants us to say yes to everything, which is great. I want us to be saying yes to more things, but doing it properly. But this bill is encouraging NIMBYs to say no in their backyard. And I just don't get it. I'm like, housing is really, really important in this country, and we're actually being stymied by the government right now to be able to do some progressive policy around making sure that that land is available for future planning in our city, in our region. But this bill's kind of saying you can't do that. So, come on, government, is it yes or no? Anyway, that's what I wanted to say from a political point of view. And that does impact on what we do. That does impact on our regional policy, our planning, and our way that we interact with the TAs. Because we need to be stepping up a little bit around this, because this stuff is hitting us, but once it hits us, it hits the TAs. How do they consent for a farm? How do they consent for different activities that they consent for? So that's my 2 cents worth. I think the staff, you've done a really good job at this. There are elements in this that I don't like, but when I do put the business that this council has to do, I think you've done a really good job at balancing it, so thank you.
Kia ora. So I'll put it to the vote now then. We've got that additional recommendation. Absolutely, we can have division. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And then a division, so those against? No. And so then we record who, do we not? Oh, okay. There's a different process. Got you.
Yes. So, for item 8.2, submission on resource management, consenting and other system changes amendment bill, we have Councillor Robinson. For. Councillor Sunkel.
For.
Yeah. Councillor Scott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor East.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Yes.
Councillor Burns.
For.
Chair Pauling,
4.
Councillor Ward,
4.
Councillor Mackenzie,
Against.
Councillor Karakia,
Aye.
Councillor Swiggs,
4.
Councillor Edge,
4.
Councillor DJ online,
4.
Councillor Mackay, Councillor Mackay,
4.
Councillor Southworth,
4.
Yeah, apology.
Yep. Okay. Got you. Okay, so we've got 13 for and 2 against, so that's carried. Thank you. So we are almost at 12:30, and we were expecting to have completed the meeting, but we obviously haven't. So I suggest that we actually adjourn. We have a workshop at 1 o'clock, so I think we go into the workshop, and then the subsequent part of our committee meeting is report items for information, which I think should be fairly straightforward. And also, I don't think some councillors, if you have to get away to something else, the really important part is being involved in the annual plan workshop. And so, unless anyone else has got a really burning thing to say on this, Councillor Sunkel.
I just wonder how long it might take to run through these last pieces, and whether
Well,
we spend 10 minutes now and defer till 1:10 the next start. I just...
You could do. It just depends on who asks what questions. That's always the unknown, isn't it? So that's why I was thinking maybe we defer, and then it might only be coming back for another 15 minutes at the end of the workshop. That's Chair Pauling.
I was probably in line with John to maybe push on, and
Okay.
maybe another 15 minutes and see if we can do it. We'd have to do the extension first to go over the 12:30 thing, but then just see if we can get it done in another 15 minutes later lunch and start the workshop just a little bit later potentially.
Okay. All right. Well then, it's on councillors to keep there. So there we go. Moving, and I'll second that one. Am I allowed? Yep. Yes. Yep. So I'll second that. Okay. So in which case then we're now moving on to. Oh, sorry. Who? All those in favour of extending? Aye. Any against? No, that's carried. Okay, right. So report items for information now. We'll go to 9.1, and we have. Let me find my place. Catherine will speak to this. So this is the resolution status report.
I've presented, as you can see, there are some amber around sort of the dust resolutions, but everything else is green. So staff are happy to answer questions on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for looking at me. I just had a quick question, and I really just wanted an update about where things are at, and where things potentially might come back and where they might come back to, so that we can just have a bit of visibility on that.
And I've sorted Jessie out to come and answer those. Jessie.
Kia ora, councillors, through you, Chair. So just in relation to the dust work, we do have an update in the resolutions paper there. We will be bringing back to the committee and the Strategy and Policy Committee in May a paper addressing the resolutions, including a scope around the background levels of dust report. So we've got a process we're working through there with Te Whatuora staff and also the quarry sector industry. So we've got a workshop coming up at the end of this month with Te Whatuora, and then we'll be checking in with the industry in March, and we'll be formulating the advice and everything around the background scope to bring back to the committee in May. So that's taking a little bit longer, but just with the workshopping of the scope that we need to do in that respect. The other resolutions around the gravel management strategy is coming through to council in the coming months. We also have the RPS review, which we're aware of at this stage, and the delays there. The other resolutions around the pre-application guidance and the better practice around quarry management plans, that's being built into some of the consent review work that's happening at the moment. Been advised that will be around about August this year that we'll start to see some of that come through. And we've also got a paper around the health statement, which will be built into the discussion in May as well. So that's largely the timelines of the work that we're doing at the moment.
Thanks for that, Jesse. I appreciate the effort that you're doing and fine with the timelines there. One question I have is, do you need, how's the relationship with Te Whatu Ora? That it's been difficult. And the question I have is, do you need any advocacy support from us to get a little bit further down the track with them?
The relationship's really strong, definitely at a staff level. Just very cognizant that the staff at Te Whatu Ora are going through a restructure process at the moment as well. So we've just, in terms of the ability to actually engage on certain things, has been the challenge. We're just very conscious of that as we work through the timelines of that. So working this work through, but very conscious of the challenges that they're facing as well in that regard. So, yeah. But, yeah, otherwise good.
I had one question, which was that we had agreed and given as completed that the regional policy statement was to be the appropriate mechanism for considering setbacks, and our RPS has suffered its own setback. So is there another way of us progressing that in absence of the RPS, or is it just delayed as and when the RPS next comes back?
Just on that one, Chair, the RPS team has advised that actually that is the best mechanism to get that, but their advocacy with some of the district councils, particularly those undergoing district plan reviews, which we do through our work program, we can underline that, but and advocacy to central and government around setting some standards at the national scale. So there are those things, and I think we identified them a little further back as well. So, but the RPS is the best place. Yeah,
for more certainty. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so do we have the resolutions? Oh, Councillor. Oh, sorry, Councillor Korako. You no. Okay, that's everyone. So, resolutions. Resolutions on the resolutions. So noting. So I have a mover. Councillor Sunkle, seconder. Councillor Mackay. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? No. So that's carried. Thank you. And then we're into the final paper, I think. 9.2. It's an update on government update and submissions reports. So we have Cecilia on that one.
So, tēnā koutou katoa. I'll keep this brief because this report is a standing item to this committee on current and upcoming central government consultations of relevance to council and local government, and also to report back on submissions to external organisations. So there are two submissions we've got to report back to the committee since the last meeting in November. The first is a submission to the Ministry for the Environment on New Zealand's international climate change target, and also provided as a submission to the Christchurch City Council on the return of the Pūrau Reserve. And last week, you may have heard that hearings and a community board decision on that. I've also outlined current and upcoming consultations in 2025, but many a signal for mid-25, and suggestions about how council may wish to respond. In terms of current consultations, obviously we had the Resource Management Bill presented to you today. There's also a draft submission on the Water Services Bill currently being prepared, and that will come to councillors next week for feedback ahead of the due date. That sort of concludes things, and we'll continue to provide council with advice on government announcements as information becomes available.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Coy.
Kia ora, Cecilia. Rapaki was very appreciative of the assistance that was given, during that that submission process. And Chair Pauling attended, did you?
And me.
The Urupa, yeah.
Yep, I gave our submission on behalf of the council on the day.
That was appreciated. I just wanted to note that. Thank you.
And yeah, I was in attendance as well.
And you as well, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, another question, Councillor Edge.
Thank you. My question really is related to the other submissions that we could make. I'm on the Department of Conservation proposals for conservation management system, and I know that the 28th of February is the due date for that. But my feeling is that given the scope that appears to be being considered by the Department of Conservation, a submission from us would be useful on a number of fronts. In terms of our RPS, for example, the protection of our outstanding and natural landscapes and significant features as well. That's a really important part of it. The way we look after our rivers and the interrelationship with the Department of Conservation in terms of land management adjacent to our land. But also we're talking about Kiutakitai, whole of river corridor kind of development. We have parcels of our land, but there's also public land, and especially Department of Conservation. And if they're looking at ways of strengthening relationships with hapu, targeted investment, all those sorts of things, then the ability is to kind of work in partnership with them to deliver perhaps on our regional parks and as a win-win for everybody. But yeah, I just think that in terms of biosecurity, we know that in the Waitawa Clarence River, for example, we get a lot of cooperation from the Department of Conservation. And so I just think that if we could look at that and think about making a submission on some of the things that they're looking at and the opportunities. So it's about submitting to capture opportunities in joint interagency cooperation.
Yeah, so staff looked at this consultation and considered that it was primarily around DOC's financial arrangements to fund conservation land and not direct implications for council's core business. Consider whether a sort of high-level principle comments might be suitable given the outcomes sought. But sort of at this time, given priority of other submissions, that there was no direct implications for council's core service. And given its initial consultation and there's sort of opportunities to advocate these kind of messages in different ways, staff recommendation was not to submit in this instance.
Could we maybe have just a look to see if, because I know, the Puro, for example, is just a one-pager. It's sort of like a, and I know it's very different context, but, whether there's just a high-level general support or...
I think that would be useful because we're talking about strategy and policy. We're talking about the future, all of those sorts of things. This is a strategy and policy committee, and I think that it's appropriate for this committee through council to actually support or identify the opportunities that are potentially there and keep it simple. Maybe it is a one-pager, but it's at least saying we want to talk.
I've definitely felt that DOC is perhaps one organisation that as a governance table we aren't as connected with. I don't feel like I know as much about DOC and their work and how we work with them as I would like. And that is something that I've raised with staff and looking at how we can upskill our own knowledge around that. So in that vein, that might be a good opportunity just to sort of start a bit of better connection from our point of view.
So I'll just round back with staff and come back with advice to you, having had another look at it.
Yep. Thank you. And Councillor Robinson.
I actually had that earmarked as well. The reasons are similar but different as well, because when you actually look at the consultation document from the Department of Conservation, it sort of alludes to allowing the retirement or disposal of some of their land for things that may not be something that we also as a region, well, some of it's infrastructure, but some of it's other things, enabling things that maybe we question. So I think we need to, see where we sit, whether that's for or against. We've got to have a position on it. That's what I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Burns.
Thanks, Chair. It's not a question, it was actually a thought, if that's okay to say it. I think in light of what Councillor Scott and Ward brought to Council prior to Christmas in relation to conservation lands, wilding, pine, etc., when you look at briefly across there about recalibrating costs and bits and pieces, it's probably highly appropriate that we do have some sort of consultation.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Sweets? Do you? No? Councillor. So is that everybody spoken or asked questions? Sorry, we're at questions. I'm trying to race ahead because I'm aware of the clock. So has everybody asked questions they want to ask at this point? Yes, that looks like a yes. Thank you, Celia. So the resolutions, we have resolutions. So can I have a mover? Councillor Burns, a seconder, Councillor Robinson. And so all those, no, discussion, sorry. So does anybody like to talk to anything? No, nope. Keeps it simple. Okay, so can I have all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? No. Okay. Oh.
Can we have a secretarial note just picking up that our staff will come back to us with a review of the Conservation Department?
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so then that was our last item. So just to say the next meeting will be on the 5th of March, and I'll also just to note that we will come back for our workshop, which is a public workshop at 1:15, and so that will need to go up. We have some mechanism for communicating to the public who'll be thinking that it starts at 1, that it's at 1:15. Or 1:10, 1:15. And so that's that. So Councillor Davies to close.
Unahia ki te uru tapu nui o tāne, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara tākatā, koia rā I rongo, whakaira ake ki runga, kia tīna, haumie, hui e, tāhiki e.